Hello again. This is another weekly catch-up session for the rich text editor scaffolding and the wiki edit page view migration. Um, so yeah, let's start. I have the first point on the rich text editor scaffolding updates, and I have well, this is a big point, and it's about analysis that I've been making about our initial decision of putting the rich text editor on GitLab UI. So I'm gonna verbalize this, so we have a summary of my points, and then we can start the discussion and talk about it. So I dedicated some time to think about what are the consequences of putting the rich text editor in GitLab UI. Last week we received some feedback about what are the consequences of implementing the golden master test in GitLab UI. So the thing is that we are implementing a new process and a new job for generating features from the Markdown API in GitLab UI. And like that started a conversation, and over the weekend I've been trying to think like to discover more unintended consequences of this of the decision of implementing those tests in GitLab UI, but at the same time like the deeper, like the core decision that is actually implementing the editor in GitLab UI. And I came up with other consequences that I would like to avoid, and I think that like based on those consequences, I think that it's probably better if we start implementing the editor in GitLab from the beginning. So these are the consequences that I thought about until now. The first one, and the one that I'm very worried about, is the support for internationalization. So usually in GitLab UI components, we don't put labels inside the components because they are abstract enough that each use case of the component in GitLab will have a different, like their own specific labels. I was sharing the example of the to-go component where it has two states, the off state and the on state. But what the labels that you relate to those states are very specific to each use case within the application. In the case of the rich text editor component, we will have labels for everything. Like we will have labels for the toolbar buttons, for the drop down that displays all of the actions that you can do in the editor. And we already have a system in place to implement internationalization in GitLab. And I would like to avoid introducing a new pattern or creating a new internationalization system in GitLab UI to support those labels. Well, perhaps we can, well, no, I'm gonna go through all of the points and then we can discuss. I was thinking like perhaps discussing each point individually. So the other point is about the golden master tests. I think that we should we should pay like attention, and I think that implementing those tests is very important. And we are like adding a lot of complexity to GitLab UI just to support a set of tests that is very specific to a single component and that probably no other component is going to use in within that project. And in my opinion, that will introduce a lot of maintainability issues because, you know, it's going to be an obscure system that is like an alternative to systems that we already have in place to generate front-end features. Like in GitLab, we already have a system for this that we could easily reuse, and we could other engineers are familiar with that. So I think that we could take a lot of advantage of that. Like, you know, it would be more maintainable if everyone knows how to easily generate those features. my third point is about the developer documentation and users documentation. Uh, we were thinking about putting users documentation using the storybook stories in GitLab UI, and then documenting how to implement editor extensions in the GitLab developer documentation. But I think that that has a potential of creating a lot of confusion, like jumping between two types of documentation for a single component. Um, and finally, I think that, you know, moving I feel like saying repeatedly that what I want to do is like eventually move the editor to GitLab UI once we have history books set in place. But I think that that idea doesn't make sense. Like imagine that we decide to move the rich text editor to GitLab in 3 months. I think that that will like make us like create a large merge request with thousands of lines of code that probably maintainers won't be familiarized with, and that will like that is not consistent with our development process. So I think that we should like put the editor in the project where we actually want to, you know, to we want that component to live from the beginning. uh, so yeah, you know, I think that my what really motivated me to put the editor in GitLab UI was like the quick iteration that we can get from having a linear CI continuous integration system, because the GitLab continuous integration system is like very heavy now. But I think that the next, like the coming 2 or 3 milestones are gonna be about creating a pros mirror schema that supports the content type, the types of content that are supported in GitLab Flavor Markdown. And we will need like that kind of feedback from product design. So I think that perhaps right now we can spend some time like setting up something that is like a system that is robust to implement the editor, and after that we can like work at the same time on implementing history book and get product design feedback at that point. So what do you think?
So yeah, I think I agree with most of what you said. Uh, to talk about storybook and GitLab UI components, there are actually a lot of components in shared components folder of GitLab repository, which actually like don't really have a storybook of any sorts. And we were planning on like I think there is an issue already open to put those components in the storybook as well. And I think the point you made about labels is is quite appropriate, because uh, like we should think about GitLab UI as like building blocks, like Lego blocks of our whole design system. And what rich text editor is, it's kind of like a huge piece of block, and it requires a lot of infrastructure and code that GitLab already has. So I think it does make sense to actually have this as a shared component inside of GitLab. Uh, if you compare it with the Markdown editor, or let's say Editor Lite, uh, both of those components also exist in GitLab, whereas they could also have been like by the logic we are going, they could also have been in GitLab UI, but they do not exist in GitLab UI for that same reason. So yes, I think the problem that we have right now, which favors GitLab UI, is that we wouldn't really have the documentation in one place, because we really want to have a storybook sort of thing. But then again, I have 2 points regarding this. The first point I already discussed, that uh, we uh, uh, GitLab UI. Sorry, I lost track of what I was saying.
No worries.
You said the documentation or
Yeah, the documentation. Yeah, I already have talked about this, that documentation for the shared components. It's in the plan to include that in the storybook.
Yeah, the point is like there is an open RFC about creating including a storybook in GitLab as well. So we can take components like I could say even editor light and create an interactive system where we can see the uses of a component that cannot exist in GitLab UI. Um, and we are, we are working towards that. Like there is an open merge request with a reference implementation, but there are many technical challenges that we have to address first.
Yeah, so I think that can be solved by that. Uh, and yeah, the other advantage of yeah, since we also have a Markdown editor and all those uh, a lot of things that are actually shared components that like join a lot of building blocks and have labels and everything uh, inside of GitLab. So I think it makes sense to keep it in GitLab as well.
Well, thanks for your feedback, Himanshu. Chad, what do you think? I know that we were like talking about this before starting the recording call, but
so before you started the recording, I was uh, arguing the other side to leave it there, but I think I got convinced uh, that it's better to have it in GitLab. Uh, I definitely think we should try to work on the storybook implementation and maybe like raise the visibility of that or ask the rest of the editor team to help with it, because that will make all this easier to see what's going on. And the other thing that I thought of is, and I'll put that in here, is the frameworks we have. This because I worked on this last week too. The frameworks we're going to use for experimentation and feature flagging and for metrics, it will be much easier to use all of those at a granular level within the rich text editor to say, we're working on this particular feature within the rich text editor. We're going to put metrics and experiments around that and do multivariate experiment within it and use all of the tools that are available within GitLab for that. Whereas if it's over in GitLab UI, we wouldn't necessarily have all of that support. So yeah, I think I changed my mind. It's good to do it in GitLab, but we should try to make that as smooth as possible. And if Storybook helps that, we should do it. And maybe even look at if we have pain points in the CI, like we're running stuff that we don't need to, we should like not be afraid to raise those up and say, look, why did we need to run all of these tests that have nothing to do with what we did, and use that as an opportunity to fix some pain points with the CI system in GitLab.
that's right. Like rather than like trying to skip or or maneuver around our CI problems, perhaps we should face those problems and contribute to make the situation better. Another point that I didn't put in there in the document that I also think that is important is that Eric has made a lot of emphasis in instrumentation. Sorry, I cannot speak English today. And he wants to measure the usage in a very granular level of all of the actions that are happening in the editor, like when the user is clicking a toolbar button or the user is executing a command at game. It's like the common pattern here, the common theme is that GitLab already provides uh, some like tools for handling those kind of use cases. Like we already have a good metric system that we can use to implement those use cases.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that
also
makes sense.
there is one more advantage of doing this in GitLab. Like, for example, when this text editor is stable and you want to, let's say, add this text editor uh, to build a different kind of static site editor. I mean, what is other than what we have right now. So we might need some additional functionality in GitLab, and we might, in order to do that, we might need some additional functionality in both GitLab and GitLab UI, and it would be very cumbersome to work on both repositories at the same time.
That's right. It's like I think that that point relates to the golden master with our golden master test situation. Like we have to implement if we want like to commit the features in the GitLab repository, we have to create a custom CI job in GitLab to make that happen, and then combine that with GitLab UI by implementing something else. So it seems like the editor depends on GitLab to implement several things, and we have to work on two repositories at the same time. Cool. Uh, well, I'm glad that we are all on the same page, and that was my point for today. So, Himanshu, do you want to, or are there any comments before jumping to the next topic?
I think that's it for now. I think moving it to the GitLab makes a lot of sense. Uh,
Cool. So, what are the dates in the wiki edit page?
so Wiki edit page, I was able to convert all of it to like view wise, at least it's converted. There is still a lot of work needs to be done, but that for example, you need to use uh, GL components. I'm not using GL components everywhere. Uh, so for example, that stuff needs to, like, we need to talk to UX about it, because GL field uh, and all those components have a different style than what Wiki style is right now. And if I go on adding using the GL components and also overriding the styles to match what it is right now, that would be very counterproductive.
So, when you talk about GL components, are you talking about GitLab UI components?
Yeah, GitLab UI components. So I'm not using GitLab UI components here. For example, instead of using GL input, I'm actually using a real input. And instead of using GL select, I'm using a regular select. So uh, yeah, I don't think that matters much right now, because as long as it looks like what it looked like earlier and the functionality remains the same, we can do it in the next step.
Okay, sounds good.
And
Yeah,
also,
but I
there are some critical bugs that need to be fixed. For example, I was not able to completely uh, integrate the markdown field with it. I mean, it works correctly for existing pages which are already saved, but does not work for new pages. Need to figure out how the whole thing works. Just need to spend a little more time on it. And yeah, there are a few remaining things that I need to do, like the JavaScript written earlier in old style needs to be converted to Vue, and we need to uh, like add support for error tracking as well, like error handling. It's like if you have like like what used to come from the server earlier, we need to handle it in Vue. And yeah,
Jumping back to the topic about the GitLab UI components, I still have a question. So you said that if we use GitLab UI components, we have to restyle them to look the way that they look in the wiki right now, right?
yes, yes.
But aren't those components like they implement the design system style? So why do we have to restyle them? Like if we use those styles, we are making the that form consistent with the design system.
Yes, exactly. So my point is that we don't want to change the style. Like we don't want to change the appearance of the wiki form in this MR.
Okay.
Uh, so we need to like, if we don't use the GitLab UI components right now, we don't have to consult UX right now. Otherwise, we would have to talk to UX, and I think that we can do that in the next iteration of this.
Awesome. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was that was like my only doubt. Well, that's awesome. I think that's great progress.
Yeah, I think there are not a lot of like, there are like 3 or 4 tests failing, and just need to figure out. It's mostly that all the tests were earlier written in Haml, sorry, Ruby. They need to be removed, and we need to write those tests for Vue. So I think it's mostly a porting job, but I think we can keep the Haml test as well, Ruby test as well, because they're mostly feature specs.
Cool. Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that they are testing the form end to end. So
Yeah.
that's a good benefit.
Yeah, because anyways, even though this form is converted to Vue, the action of this form is still the page itself. So when you submit the form, the whole page refreshes. So there's no like Ajax stuff happening yet, because we don't really care about that right now.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I've shared the merge request. You can take a look at it if you'd like. Uh, the pipeline is failing. I mean, a lot of failing scripts. We need to like take a look at those and see what we can do about it.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna take a look today this afternoon.
Yeah. And as for the pairing session, like I just put that in the calendar today. If it is okay with you, you folks, we can have it now. I mean, after this meeting, which is at 3:30 p.m. Like 25 minutes from now, or we can have it tomorrow. What do you prefer?
Honestly, I think that I prefer to have it tomorrow, so I
Okay.
can I don't know I can do some things in my to do list after
Okay,
this meeting.
that sounds good. Yeah, so that was my plan as well. I wanted to bring it up in the meeting itself, so that we can see if we can reschedule it for tomorrow. So yeah, for tomorrow, I will be moving it 30 minutes earlier, like right now, but tomorrow, because we also have the front end call.
Sounds good. Cool. So in my case, I'm gonna work not today on first on moving what I've done so far from GitLab UI to GitLab, which isn't a lot to be fair. I only created like the editor scaffold, and I have an open merge request that you've been reviewing about linking the dependencies tip tab to the text editor. I'm gonna close out merge request. I'm gonna move it. I'm gonna move both merge requests, like creating the main editor component and those dependencies and that dependencies MR. And I'm gonna ask for your review today.
Yeah, sounds good.
Do you want to set up another session to pair to try to get the golden master test set up
Yes, I
in
would
there?
love to.
So the one thing you mentioned, and we could do this offline somewhere, but and just ping me, is you mentioned using the existing fixture framework for this. So I'm not sure what that looks like or exactly how it will fit in. Like, it seems like this is a little bit different in that it's going to generate and commit new files as part of every build, or potentially as part of every build.
Yeah, I
Yes,
can talk about. Yes, sure.
I was going to. Well, I've been thinking about that because that's different from the golden master test because you're not committing the fixtures. So what we can do is like what the front end fixtures those is that it generates those fixtures every time that the CI job runs. So they are not persistent. They are transient. What we should do to make them a golden master test is to commit just snapshot tests. So we generate a snapshot that is committed to the repository and contain that snapshot. We will be compared against the fixture that is generated in the CI, and I think that achieves the same kind of test that a golden master characterization test is.
You're saying just snapshot tests?
Yes.
So those would be committed?
Yeah, they are committed and they are compared against the output that is generated from the Markdown API.
So, but don't you have to manually update snapshots?
You have to manually update them.
Yeah, I think
But
that's not good. It should any part of it that relies on manual effort to ensure that the actual logic is the same is goes against the spirit of this. It's supposed to automatically catch whenever the implementations diverge.
I think that I'm
Uh,
doing a really bad job on explaining myself right now. But
Okay,
I'm
maybe you
gonna.
could write up a new one and like
you can
retest.
automatically generate new snapshots by running a command.
So that would be part of the build job.
No, we don't really want the build to commit something to the repository.
Normally you don't, but this is an exception to that rule. Like,
Yeah,
because
but we would be adding a lot of noise to GitLab repository if we allow our build to do a commit. And usually we know like no one can actually commit to the repository directly. You have to go through a merge request. Even uh, GitLab bot also creates a merge request.
yeah, there's other things that do that though. Like there's derived files that are checked in as somewhere, isn't there? Like for documentation or something else.
No, like we don't really automatically commit anything to the GitLab repository. It would make,
Okay,
I think it makes, I think what we can do is we can commit this, we can add a script to commit this to a separate repository through CI, and then we can compare that.
I I don't know. I think that adds too much complexity. If there is really no precedent and they don't want to commit things as part of CI, I would instead go the route of, like we said, there's linters or danger scripts which require people, if they've changed the corresponding GitLab flavor markdown files on the back end, to commit the corresponding fixture files with them. And
But that should be unnecessary. Like the backend, the backend API would always generate the up-to-date fixtures. Like the fixtures API, the fixtures thing would send a request to the Markdown API and give you the latest HTML every time the build is run.
right, but that has other downsides. It's slow, and it's flaky. It has the potential of failing. The API fails, and then you have to determine which version of the API you run it against. Like if you looked at the comments I made on the other Golden Master, like by definition, you have to decide what version of the live running API you have to run
No,
it
you're not
against.
sending it. You're not sending a request to the live API. You're sending it to uh, the API that is running locally in CI.
So like a feature spec.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that you once you see the proof of concept of the idea that I'm trying to explain and I couldn't, you will like it, chat. I'm gonna once I made that update to the proof of concept merge request, I'm gonna share with you, and you can tell me if it's
So
actually a golden master test.
the one thing that doesn't, the benefit that I liked that it doesn't give us is it it shows how the shape of the API has evolved. You can see that in the Git history from the fixtures. Not if this all, but that's not a big deal, I guess. If this all runs as part of the MR, right? It has to run for front end and back end MRs and catch any changes on either side.
That's where the yes snapshots can help us, because when let's say that we generate a just a snapshot, that it could be like the first one that will be generated based on the front end fixtures that we are generating with the R specs, right? And we commit those snapshots to the repository. If at some point the front end fixtures are regenerated in CI and they generate a different output, they will match the just snapshots that are committed to the repository. And then we have to decide either to update the snapshot or perhaps cache a regression in the Markdown API. So the just snapshots are fulfilling the purpose of having that history in the changes of the output.
Okay, that makes sense. So what this workflow implies is when the backend, if someone changes the GitLab flavored markdown on the backend in an MR, that forces them to regenerate the snapshot from the rich text editor before the entire build can pass, or so if it's unintentional, they have to fix the regression. If it's an intentional change, they either have to at the same time implement that change in the rich text editor or pin that test and not have coverage before they can merge it.
Exactly. Uh, if they make a change in the Markdown API, those tests are gonna fail.
And it's got to all be fixed together. Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to add one more thing here, that I don't think it would be necessary to actually commit the snapshots. Like we have in the integration test, we have the ability to mock a particular API. So and it actually sends a request to the real API, like it basically sends a request to a fixture. So you would just generate a fixture for all the different markdown contents we have, and then we just write an integration test to compare it. Yeah, I guess math snapshot is what we're looking for. So yeah, I kind of contradicted myself there.
Yeah. I like to avoid integration tests whenever possible. They're slow and flaky and painful to write.
No, I meant the front-end integration tests. They are very fast.
Okay, front-end integration. Sure. We also want to make sure that this is easy to run locally, though, right? So
Yeah,
when you run this locally, you don't want to necessarily have to wait for all of those API calls to be made. That's slow. Whereas if they're committed to the repo, then they will always run fast, and you don't even have to have network access to run them locally.
yeah, you don't need network access to run them locally. You just need to generate the fixtures, and then you can run the integration test. You don't really need much. Yeah, though the front end fixtures take some time to generate. That's a one-time thing.
These won't be part of the front end fixtures necessarily. They're different. They're just pieces of HTML, right?
Yeah, so yeah, they would be part of front end fixtures anyway.
Anyway, we should discuss it as an MR, like write up what we propose. We'll talk through the pros and cons. Like I think it's okay, but we just need to ensure that we're considering all the pros and cons. There's like pros and cons of every different approach. Like you don't want to have to run API requests locally if you don't need to. You don't even want to have to run them all the time on CI if you don't need to, because that introduces the possibility of flakiness. Like ideally, you only run them when you need to, like when the code involved has changed and stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
but you
it's
would
okay.
never actually call GitLab.com's API. You would always call the API on the local server. So it's never really a network request. It's always a local request.
Sure.
Cool.
Okay. You're gonna open a new MR for this, Enrique, or
I'm
go
gonna
with?
I'm gonna send the proof of concept one that I shared in the
Okay, you've already
yeah
got that one.
yeah.
Can you put in a description of that, more details, like exactly what testing mechanisms you expect to use for all of the plumbing?
Yes. I think that yeah, I should document actually like the what kind of testing process we are using in general.
Okay. Yeah, like, and even you don't have to find them out, but like a placeholder for like what CI jobs we're talking about modifying or adding that we propose. That I think that'll help get a lot more context on it.
Yeah. Thanks for those guidelines, chat. That's very useful. I'm gonna do that. Awesome. So I think that we are right on time now. So thank you, Himanshu. Thank you, chat, and have a great week.
Bye. Good stuff.
Thank
I
you.
think we're doing the hard decisions early. That's the
That's
way
right.
it should work.
Yeah, I think that
Don't do them later.
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
I well, see you.
yeah. Bye.
Bye.